Today we're putting the choppy destroyers through their paces, so let's talk about who's the stronger hyperphase wielding death machine, the Skorpekh destroyers or the Ophydians. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. In today's video we're doing another Necron unit comparison. I thought it made sense to look at the Skorpechs and the Ophydians, seeing as they have very similar unit compositions and war gear, with the choice being over an improved stat line of the Skorpekh destroyers or multiple other small advantages that the Ophydians get. In this video we'll talk about the differences between them, a bit of comparison in terms of their damage output and durability, and wind up with a discussion of which ones I think are stronger. So let's start out by going over the similarities and differences. Both of the units are 35 points per model. You take them in units of 3 to 6. They've got 3 wounds and 3 attacks, and they pretty much have the exact same war gear. Out of each unit of 3, 2 of them are armed with hyperphase threshers, very nasty power weapons with AP -3, damage 2 and +1 attack, and one's armed with a hyperphase reaper blade of strength +2, AP -4 and flat damage 3. The Skorpechs have a very tanky big profile with strength 5, toughness 5 and a 3+ save, where the Ophydians have strength and toughness 4 and a 4+ save. Basically the challenge for the Ophydians is to overcome the stat line discrepancy with all of their extra special rules and things. The Ophydians do have some bonuses to their attacks. They may only be strength 4 base, but they also get 2 extra strength 4 AP -1 claw attacks as well, meaning that they'll be a bit more efficient against hordes, and the Ophydian destroyer armed with the reap blades gets extra hits on 6s, which is pretty nice to have. In terms of special rules, they both get hardwired for destruction. That's the innate reroll hit rolls of 1 that destroyers get, and Ophydians also get the deep strike rule, and their whip coil bodies allow them to be -1 to hit in melee, helping them be just a little bit more durable there. If you take a plasma sight along, which is a separate elite's choice, then they both can get buffed by them. It gives them +1 strength and attack in close combat for a 1 in 6 chance of losing a destroyer. Let's see how their damage output fares against a few different targets then. So here are the numbers. Are an 105 point squad of 3 destroyers charging into various different targets. The top lines are for when they aren't buffed by a canoptic plasma sight, and the bottom lines are for when they are. As a general trend, the Ophydian destroyers tend to be stronger against Necron warriors and guardsmen. Despite only being strength 4 base, those extra claw attacks really just help swing it in their favour, and they remain at least fairly similar in damage output against the Space Marine targets, against intercessors or Gravis armoured aggressors. The Skorpechs win out a little bit here, but the difference isn't too severe. Against vehicles though and harder targets, the Skorpechs do tend to come into their own. Against a toughness 7 vehicle, they do handily beat out the Ophydians. However, a lot more goes the Ophydians' way when they're buffed by a plasma sight. In general, they just get quite a lot more use out of the +1 strength, as going from strength 4 to strength 5 is really quite a big and important jump. When they're buffed by a plasma sight, the Ophydian destroyers win out against all the hordes and all of the Space Marines, though I'll admit that the difference isn't too severe. Both units are really quite good at chewing through intercessors and aggressors. Even a minimum size squad of 3 with the plasma sight will go through around about 7 intercessors or about 4 aggressors. Not too bad at all. Against toughness 7 and toughness 8 vehicles, the Skorpekh destroyers do still win, but now it's only by a very narrow margin indeed. Overall, if there's no plasma sight around, the Skorpechs will win against Space Marine and tougher targets, where the Ophydians will win against hordes, and if there is a plasma sight around, then the two are actually really quite balanced, though the Ophydians do win out in most categories. In terms of durability, unsurprisingly the Skorpechs reign supreme. Even if they don't use their Whirling Blade stratagem, which we will come on to, the Skorpechs are just decently tougher against pretty much everything that you shoot at them. It doesn't make the biggest deal ever if they're being shot at by overcharged plasma or by las cannons, just because the high AP means that the Skorpechs' heavy armour doesn't actually matter all that much. But against small arms and heavy bolter fire, the Skorpechs are almost twice as tough as the Ophydian destroyers, in terms of the amounts of hits needed to take them down. For example, it would take 54 bolt rifle shots to down a unit of 3 Skorpekh destroyers, or 27 bolt rifle shots to down a unit of 3 Ophydians. I did run a few numbers on melee as well, just to see if the whip coil bodies made all that much difference. If you're being hit by Space Marines with no AP, then the Skorpechs are still decently more durable, 121 attacks needed to take them down compared with 72 for the Ophydians. They're quite even if they were being hit by Space Marines with power swords, 32 attacks to take down the Skorpechs, whereas it's 27 for the Ophydians, so the whip coil bodies really do help them catch up, at least against certain weapons. When against Thunderhammers though, the Skorpekh destroyers win again, this time because the Ophydian destroyers won't get any additional benefit from their whip coil bodies. The Thunderhammers are already -1 to hit, and they can't be modified any further as per the core rules. In general though, the takeaway is that Skorpekh destroyers are vastly tougher, and the whipcoil bodies don't even allow the Ophydians to catch up in melee, unless they're hit by really optimal weapons or units that are only going to be hitting on 4+. So stats wise, it's generally a win for the Skorpekh destroyers in durability, and damage output is fairly similar. Skorpekh's better versus heavies, and Ophydian's better against hordes. In a real game though, there's plenty of other factors to consider, so here are a few for both units. In general, the Skorpekh destroyers do just generally tend to be better on their stat line, but they do have one other advantage, and I'll admit it's a very good one. Whirling Onslaught is a 1 command point stratagem that they can use, and you use it when they're targeted, and it means that enemy attacks for that phase are now -1 to wound. It doesn't even have to just be in the fight phase, you could do it against shooting attacks as well, and honestly this is really quite a powerful reactive debuff on strength 5 models. Very few things are going to be wounding you on any better than a 4, and if you're being shot by small arms such as bolter fire, then that will be wounding you on 6s. You've basically just made yourself near immune to small arms. Honestly, it's a really strong stratagem, and a very good reason to run the Skorpechs. On the Ophydian side, they get more numerous benefits, but I'd argue not quite as powerful. I'd say that they get a little bit more benefit out of the plasma sides than the Skorpekh destroyers do, and it's quite easy to deploy with them, as it can teleport into battle next to them, and then use its injector before they charge. They're faster than the Skorpechs with plus 2 inch movement, which is helpful but not necessarily the biggest deal in the world. And I was quite disappointed that they don't actually have the fly keyword, despite clearly looking like they are hovering. One of their biggest advantages is the ability to deep strike, meaning that they can get very close and at least attempt to charge for guaranteed, but they don't really have any 100% successful guaranteed way to get a charge out of deep strike. I'd say that likely the best you're going to get is Novok to give you +1 to charges, and then reroll that charge either with a Warlord trait or with a command reroll. It gives you around about a 2/3 chance to get in after that reroll, which is reasonable, but it's hardly guaranteed. I would say that these guys have a really decent synergy with Novok, particularly as they get the +1 to charge, which they do really want, and they get extra AP on the charge with those claws. We also mentioned just how much they like getting +1 strength, so it's pretty decent if you could coordinate their arrival with the protocol of the Hungry Void. You would need a support character nearby for that though. Their unique stratagem is the Burrowing Nightmare stratagem. This is a redeployment one, it's just 1 command point, and you remove them from the battlefield, popping up again at the end of your next movement phase, potentially allowing them to be another threat later in the game. It's a nice option to have, but I think the actual cases where you'd use it will be quite niche. I think with their decent 10-inch movement, you're not usually going to find them so far from the enemy that they can't make another charge that turn, and you're essentially missing out on 2 movement phases worth of movement, for which they could go anything over 20 inches. I think it could have its uses, but the actual games that you want to use it might be quite few and far between. So in terms of battlefield roles to field these guys, I think for starting on the board, there's very little question that the Skorpekh destroyers are just superior. The damage output is fairly equivalent, and as they're moving up towards the enemy, they are very likely to be taking fire, so being far tougher and having access to that excellent -1 to wound stratagem are both very solid options. I just don't think that the +2 inch movement from the Ophydians is really going to be enough. It is helpful, but I'd rather have double the durability. Sorry, I know I've written that they can fly there, I'm afraid that was a typo. The 9th edition missions and way that you play is really quite durability centric. Having really tanky units that are massive close combat threats is really helpful, and I see the Skorpechs being a pretty decent unit for that in the Necron army. So if we're not starting them on the board, the question is whether or not the Ophydians can be viable coming out of Deep Strike. The way I'd want to field them is somewhere between 3 and 6 of them, with a plasma sight in Novok, and planning to jump them down at some point when you can use a command point reroll to reroll that 8-inch charge. I think it's still a very risky option. You're either going to get an absolute ton of damage output out of them, or literally none at all if you do fail the charge, and either way there's a very good chance you're just going to get gunned off the board by the enemy the next turn whatever happens. I'm sure it'll be absolutely brutal when it works, and you could potentially think about trying to wrap and trap an enemy unit, but I just don't see it being quite as reliable as the Skorpechs. For other Deep Strike reserve options, you could think about using strategic reserves on the Skorpechs, or if you have a Deceiver about, then you could put them in strategic reserve for free. Could potentially be a solid option to get the best of both worlds. Otherwise, you could think about units like Flayed Ones, which are a bit tankier than the Ophydians with their better reanimation protocols, or maybe use something like Veil of Darkness Lichguard as a deep strike melee threat, which could be more durable with the shields, or very killy indeed with war scythes. Overall, of the two, I would say that the Skorpechs are a more competitive unit in 40k at the moment, and I'm sure we'll see them featured in competitive Necron lists when people get a chance to take them to a few more tournaments. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. Are my instincts right, or have I perhaps been a bit harsh on the Ophydian destroyers? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where we should have plenty of other Necron videos coming out on the channel over the following weeks, and put a few more of the units through their paces. Finally, if you have enjoyed the video and you'd like to help support the channel, I'd just like to mention that I do have a Patreon page, which is down in the video description below. Making all of these videos does take a fair amount of time that's only possible due to the patrons, so if you are enjoying regularly, then any support is massively appreciated. Channel Patreons do get a few rewards. You get to see new videos early each week, there's regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and you also get entered into the regular channel prize giveaway with a chance to win some big kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.